Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013 Advanced. So far in this course we've been dealing with Access desktop applications, and for the balance of the course after this section we're going to take a look at web apps in Access 2013. So in this section itself what I want to do is to finish off looking at desktop applications by considering how to package an application to make it a good product, a good application for your users. Some of the tools and techniques we've already seen in the course, but I'm going to introduce you to a few others as well in this section. Now, when it comes to packaging your database application, there are various ways of categorizing the steps that you can take, and I'm going to look at them in this section in three groups. The first group are the steps you can take to actually protect the data in the database and to protect your, if you like, intellectual rights, things like the code that you've written. The second group of steps are the ones that are taken to stop your users from actually breaking the database, for doing something with it that they're not supposed to, perhaps damaging some data or using a form in the wrong way. The ways that you make sure that users can only do what they're allowed to do and that they're only going to be able to do things that won't actually break the database itself. The third category includes the steps you can take to basically make the database more user-friendly, not only to make sure that users can actually do what they want to do with the database, but also to reduce the chance that you finish up with a real support headache whereby some things are so difficult to do that users are constantly on the phone to you, emailing you, and you're never able to get any other work done at all because you spend the whole time supporting this database. So let's start with that first category, protection of the data and the code and so on in the database. From the point of view of security, the single most significant step that you can take is to encrypt a database. In Access 2013, the database is encrypted with a password. Of course, you may need to do this to both the front end and the back end. And once it's encrypted with a password, that password is the only way that you can access that database. If the password is lost, it is not possible to decrypt it. It is not possible to log into the database. So you need to either have an absolutely foolproof way of retaining that password, or you need to have a copy of the database that is not encrypted. Obviously that's not really a viable option with data that's changing all the time, but you may need to keep backup versions that are unencrypted so that you can fall back to those if necessary. So let's see how to encrypt an Access 2013 database. Now, if you're going to encrypt a database, you need to open it exclusive. So I'm going to encrypt the student database. So when I go into the Open, I need to browse to my Scratch folder. I need to identify the student database, which is that one. And then on the Open button there's a drop down. I need to open exclusive, and I now have that database open with exclusive access. So now into Backstage View. One of the options there is encrypt with password. Click with encrypt, type in the password and verify it. Now obviously how strong a password you use here is up to you. A very simple password with a few alphabetic characters is not a good idea. What I'm going to use here as the password is one that I use from time to time on these courses. It's PA55WD, so that's like password, but with the two S's replaced by two fives. PA55WD. I can assure you I don't use that password in any production systems that I'm involved in, but it's a very easy one to remember when you're demonstrating systems to people. And if when you come to use any of the exercise files, that's a good one to try if I've left a password on anything. Or the other one I use, which is a very simple password, is TOBYA, T-O-B-Y-A, all lowercase. So let's click on OK. Encrypting with a block cipher is incompatible with row level locking. Row level locking will be ignored. Don't worry about that. Just click on OK. Now let's close the database down again and let's open it up again. And of course we have to enter the password. Once you've entered the password, of course, you can get into the database. And then all you need to do in order to remove that password and decrypt the database, you must open it exclusive again. So you click on open, go through the same procedure. I'll find the database again in my Scratch folder. Obviously I need to put the password in. And then when I've done that, into Backstage View, then the option I'm presented with is Decrypt Database. Click on Decrypt, and all I have to do is to type in the password yet again, click on OK, and the database is decrypted again. Now, one of the things to bear in mind with all of the preparation steps, all of the steps involved in packaging your application, is that they do tend to overlap, and you need to choose the right set of measures to suit your application and who is going to use it, the situation they're going to use it in, and so on. So some of these steps of protection are actually unnecessary if you apply some of the others. If users can be in a situation that they can view your Visual Basic code, then you can actually password protect your Visual Basic code. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. So let's suppose that with the college student database, a user has access to the ribbon. They can go into Visual Basic and open the Visual Basic editor. If you go to the Tools menu and click on Student Database Properties, one of the options on there is the Protection tab, and you can lock the project for viewing. I'm going to use the same password that I used just now, PA55WD. Enter it again. Click on OK. Close the Visual Basic editor. Now, having closed the student database, if I open it again, click on Visual Basic, and I can't actually see any of the code at all. If I click against the student database entry in the Project Explorer over on the left there, I'm required to enter the password. And that's the only way that I can see the Visual Basic code. Once I've done that, I can go in, look at the modules and so on. And of course, to remove that password, all I need to do is to go back into the properties of this particular Visual Basic project, go into Protection, clear Lock Project for Viewing, and it's a good idea to delete the password and the confirm password so that if I decide to lock it again, I can start from scratch again. Click on OK, and then when the database is restarted, the Visual Basic code will no longer be locked for viewing. And one other thing to mention here, which I did mention before, and I'm going to use the locking of Visual Basic code as an example. It would be an incredibly annoying thing to have to work on a database where you had to continually enter a password so that you could change the Visual Basic code. But the ideal situation usually is to not lock the Visual Basic code for viewing when you're generally working on developing, maintaining, fixing your database. But before you make a new version available for users, you apply that lock as part of a sort of release procedure, things you go through before you actually produce the version that users are going to use in the real world. You can also then, as part of your testing procedure, after you've prepared that version and before the users actually get their hands on it, you can check things like the fact that the Visual Basic code is locked. Let's turn our attention now to the second category of packaging steps. This is the one where we are basically trying to stop the users get to things we don't want them to get to. To some extent, the items in the first category are, if you like, extreme cases of this, but you can be much more selective. We've already seen two techniques in general. The first technique is to set access options for the current database. We've already looked at some of these, for instance the showing of a splash screen, the ability to suppress the use of access special keys so that users cannot use the F11 key to show the navigation pane, and suppressing the display of the navigation pane in the first place. Now, for both of those, I've actually switched them off, so we shouldn't see a navigation pane, and we won't be able to show the navigation pane by pressing the F11 key. As you should remember, the way to bypass these startup options and to bypass the running of the auto exec macro is to hold the shift key down when I open a database. there is a facility to bypass that, which I mentioned earlier on as well. I'm going to leave that to your own discretion whether you intend to experiment with that. The information on how to do it is freely available on the internet or even via Microsoft. So there's one other thing I want to do, and of course the other thing that happens at the startup is the running of the autoexec macro, and I want to add one additional command to the autoexec macro. The autoexec change that I'm going to make is to add a command that runs a piece of Visual Basic code. And I'm going to write the piece of Visual Basic code first. It's very straightforward. So I start by creating a new module. In the module, I enter the code. Now the code in this case is very straightforward. It's a public function. It's called hide ribbon, and it contains a single command: show toolbar ribbon, and then the constant act toolbar no means no. So that basically says don't show the toolbar, that is the ribbon. Now I'm going to save that and give it a module name of mod hide ribbon. Just reminds me that this is the module that's got the hide ribbon function in it. Click on OK. Now I can close the Visual Basic for Applications editor, and I can go into autoexec and I can add a new action. Now the action I'm going to add is run code, and when I enter run code it asks me for a function name. If I click there, it'll use IntelliSense to suggest possible functions. There's the one I want, hide ribbon. Now I want that to be the first thing that happens, so I'm going to move that command up the autoexec so that it's the first command. So I'm going to close the autoexec, save changes, close the database, reopen the database, and what I see now is my student database with no ribbon, no navigation pane. If I press the F11 key I can't see a navigation pane, and basically a lot of my database is now protected from users. Now you have to be very careful that you don't do this until you've got a way of getting out of the database. We've got this nice quit button here, but you notice now how a user, unless they're really pretty slick on understanding how to get around these things, is really quite constrained on what they can do. So with the student database I have now changed it back to not hiding the ribbon in the autoexec, and I've also changed the startup option so that the navigation pane isn't hidden and so that F11 isn't disabled. So let me just start the database up again, and you'll see that everything's back to the way that it was. What I'm now going to do is to close the student database again, and I'm just going to change its file extension. If you change the file extension, don't make any other change, just call it acdr instead of acdb. When you start that up now with an extension of acdr, your database application is basically running in what's called runtime mode. And when a database is opened in runtime mode, all of the interface elements that can be used to allow changes to the objects in the database are hidden from the user. Even things like the inability to see the navigation pane, that's enforced as well. Now when you're going into runtime mode, you've got a couple of ways of doing it. Renaming the extension of the database from acdb to acdr is one way of doing it. Unfortunately, all a user has to do is to rename the extension back from acdr to acdb to get full functionality back again, but many users won't be aware of this. You also have the option of providing users with a mechanism for starting up the database where you use the normal acdb extension, but the run command has a /runtime switch on it. Now this isn't a brilliantly secure way of doing things, but it's certainly a very straightforward way of hiding from users most of the things that they would be able to do some damage with. Of course it is very important that everything they actually need is accessible to them. So the use of a switchboard such as here, or the use of a navigation form we saw much earlier on when we were looking at earlier versions of the movie database, absolutely essential. So all that a user could do with this particular database running in this mode is go to the students, go to the guardians, close this particular form, which is probably a button you don't really need, click on about to check the version, and then they've got a button to quit. That's all that they can do, and they can't access anything else. So I've just got one or two other topics to cover on packaging your application. I'm going to cover those in the next section, so please join me for that.